So much to talk about, in fact, that I wouldn't feel right just focusing on one thing, so I'll be dividing this into 3 separate videos in the interest of keeping up my upload schedule and keeping focus on a particular topic in each video. Ultimately, I'm trying to explain everything that this game does that puts it in the Hall of Fame for me. I mean, it's absolutely in my top 10 games of all time. If you haven't played System Shock 2 yet, you're safe for spoilers over the course of this first video. Unless, of course, you prefer to go in 100% blind as I do. Hopefully I can recommend it to you in that time. So, let's start out focusing on the grand overarching feel of the game, and how Irrational Games managed to make an RPG system that's horrifying, rather than a more traditional RPG with some horror mixed in, such as Earthbound. To anyone who's seen my older video on how Resident Evil 7 modernized a lot of what made the best games in the series so great, this should be familiar. The main focus of that video was the way that every shot fired or healing item used in the best Resident Evil games feels like a mistake, but a necessary one nonetheless. The same can be said about System Shock 2, only in an even more desperate, longer-term way. Whereas Resident Evil games typically offer a much-needed power trip towards the ending, with incredibly powerful weapons and more plentiful ammo, System Shock 2 sort of does the opposite as you go deeper and deeper into the game's madness. You get more powerful, but more unsure of yourself with every upgrade you get, and that's really where this all stems from: cybermods. Something like Prey offers you enough options that you can finish it without any character upgrades. System Shock 2, however, is much more combat and survival centric. Rather than each cybermod giving you a whole new way to play, each one gradually works you towards a playstyle as you discover it. Strength might be helpful, my inventory is always full. Well, now that I have high strength, I might as well start focusing on building my heavy weapon stat. But what about all those points I spent on standard and energy weapons in the beginning just to get by? Therein lies the doubt that haunts you throughout this game. It's almost like spending your cybermods as a necessary evil. After about 4 hours in the game, you've been through sections where your upgrade selection and playstyle really get to shine, and sections that make you think you've been putting your cybermods into all the wrong places. By this point in the game, you're aware that every upgrade purchase matters, a lot. Every character build feels like a house of cards, and putting just one card in the wrong place could make the entire build collapse. Or you could enter the next section of the game and find out that your house of cards is moved inside of a wind tunnel, and desperately wish that you had specialized differently. For instance, there will be sections in the game with almost no repair kits in the vending machines or on the ground, and so you'll really wish that you had leveled up your maintenance stat or gotten the anti-entropy power so that you could get the most out of each of those repair kits. By the end of this section, all your weapons will be doing much less damage and be close to breaking, so you'll need even more repair kits to get back to your comfort zone. I could count off dozens of examples of this, but you get the idea. All of your skills have sections where they're nearly completely useless without other skills to accompany them, and as a result, throughout this entire game, you're just focusing on the negative. Sure, you didn't have repair kits, but it was your high strength stat that allowed you to use melee attacks to conserve enough weapon durability that your guns were still there when you needed them most. However, you don't think like that. You think, oh man, why didn't I get a better maintenance stat? I'm such a dumbass. After 1 or 2 sections like this, where your character build has essentially failed you and you just barely scraped by, you're paranoid, unsure of yourself, and just generally nervous every time you have to spend a cybermod, which is just compounded by the fact that there are a dozen available upgrades at any one time. It's the sort of cosmic horror that can only be achieved in gaming, the kind where you're aware that you'll regret every decision you've made at one point or another. So how does this horror get more and more pressing as you move on through the game? Surely as you start getting cybermods in larger numbers and start having a general idea of what your build will eventually grow into, the decision on what to upgrade would be more obvious. Well, getting more cybermods is just a counterbalance. The first level of most skills is pretty cheap, the second one is much less cheap, and the third one is straight up expensive. Because of this, if you want to specialize, as you probably should, you'll be constantly filled with doubt. You could spend 20 cybermods to finally get some points into your repair ability to get new weapons earlier, but that's 20 points that could have gone into standard, making you more efficient with ammo on standard weapons that you already use. You always want to hold out for upgrades to stats that you already use a lot, but you're constantly tempted by the slippery slope that is buying cheap upgrades you haven't focused on yet. You can waste a lot of cybermods on the cheap upgrades if you're not careful. Focusing on getting level 2 or 3 for every ability is a totally valid way to play, but you'll constantly be met with squandered potential. Look at all these cool guns and armor sets that you can't even equip because none of your skills are high enough, all the machines you can't hack, all the dead batteries on your gear, and all the ammo you're wasting. No build or playstyle is safe from the horror that comes from being forced into a decision you aren't sure about. It's kind of like that moment in Soma where you can't be sure of whether or not to spoiler is a sentient being, but you have to choose whether or not to kill them in their sleep. You have to make a decision, but you'll never be sure if it was the right one. So, to return to something I said earlier, look at all these cool weapons I can't even use. This game loves to wait until you have a few points in one type of weapon before showing you the cool new weapons that use a totally different skill. You start off with a pistol and a wrench. You can equip those without any special training in your weapon types. But then you start finding shotguns and are immediately tempted to dump some points into standard weapons so you can use one. Just as you've done this, you find your first energy weapon, the laser pistol, and suddenly you want to balance out standard and energy. Then shortly after you find an assault rifle that requires maximum standard weapon skill to use, so you're tempted to do that, and then you find the EMP cannon that requires maximum energy weapon skill to use. And all of this while various heavy weapons are fighting for your attention, such as the grenade launcher. And assuming you were focusing on weapon skills, by the time you find your first exotic weapon, you'll probably already be using the weapons you're highly skilled in, so training in exotic weapons just feels redundant, but you're constantly tempted. Sounds like this would reduce the usefulness of heavy and exotic weapons, right? Well, that's where a Psi build comes in. If you focus on Psi, as I did in my first playthrough, you probably won't have very high weapon skills, meaning that when those exotics start coming around, you'll be so intrigued that you'll probably want to start investing in research and exotic weapons so that you can use them. And you'll inevitably find that they pair greatly with psionic powers. Just like in Prey, every build in this game sees every situation, item pickup, and enemy in a totally different light. And that's what makes it one of the most replayable games I've encountered in spite of its strict linearity. Everything is recontextualized in each playthrough. Not unlike Bioshock Infinite's narrative, this game stirs a sort of fear of freedom in you, only this time purely through gameplay, which is absolutely genius. You have all the power in the world to decide how you're going to approach the game, but you're always going to wish you did things differently at one point or another, and you'll always be filled with doubt during and after each decision. These same ideas apply to every cybernetic rig and weapon upgrade in the game, and every trip to those upgrade stations, not just the ones I've mentioned here. System Shock 2's gameplay says that freedom only leads to regret.
Are you afraid? What is it you fear?
The end of your trivial existence.